whoever's advising them and saying, guys, you might want to press pause on Danny Rohl, as much as I think he's highly rated, as much as he might well have come across, quite impressively in his interview process, or the one interview that we think he's had, forget about all that. Because basically you're appointing a guy who's got one full season behind him as a manager, and his achievement from that one full season as a manager was to finish in 12th position in the English Championship with Sheffield Wednesday. Now, you might be absolutely blown away by his stardust and his PowerPoint presentations and all this, but you cannot escape that fact. Never in the history of Rangers Football Club has anybody merited the position of being a serious candidate to become the manager on the back of a 12th place finish at Sheffield Wednesday in the English Championship. So I think they'd be well advised to press pause on that. I think the fact that they've shifted their attention towards Kevin Muscat is actually quite a shrewd move, because this is a guy that's a proven winner. He's won titles in 3 different countries, obviously at 3 different clubs. And I think the main reason, because he was out of the 3 that he was up against at the last stages of the interview process 2 years ago, I thought he was the outstanding candidate. And I think, funnily enough, the thing that counted against him in the final analysis was a fear from the Rangers board at that time that they'd be accused of copying Celtic's homework. Because Celtic had just had Ange Postecoglou in for a couple of seasons, he'd gone to Spurs by this point. I think there was this kind of fear that they'd just be accused of, this is lazy. What you're doing there is just because Kevin Muscat had a background of kind of learning from Postecoglou and then taking over from him at a couple of clubs. And it didn't fit right for me, because if you actually looked at the work and analysed the work that Kevin Muscat went on to do as, at these clubs, it was kind of universally acclaimed that he'd taken what Postecoglou had done and improved it. So I think he was a really credible candidate back then. And what's happened since then, by the way, he's went away and he's won a title in China last season, and he's now a couple of games away from potentially securing a second successive Super League title in China. So if anything, his credentials have skyrocketed, certainly gone up the way, while the situation at Rangers has flatlined or spiralled into decline. So I think if they could get Kevin Muscat, I think that would be a really decent appointment. And certainly from the initial reaction, I gauge that the supporters would look upon it very favourably. They would not look favourably, as Scott said, upon a Danny Rohl appointment, because they were prepared to sort of show a bit of patience and give the new board their place, given that, the Americans had come in, they spent a lot of money and they'd earned the right to make their decision. They had serious concerns, and it's the same, based on the same set of principles as I've just said there about Danny Rohl. Forget about what you might think, forget about what the guy might promise. Russell Martin got that job in the back, and the latest addition to his CV was 16 games getting Southampton relegated from the English Premier League. And on that basis, he should never have been in the discussion. And I'm afraid that it's just that situation now amplified onto the whole Danny Rohl thing, because the Rangers supporters won't give them time this time. They've seen that they made a decision based against the judgment of the fans, and the fans got exactly what they knew they were going to get from Russell Martin. They will not tolerate the same mistake being made again. And at that point, it's a real credibility issue for Andrew Cavenagh and his assembled board, and particularly for Kevin Thelwell, who, just keeps blundering around from one really questionable decision to the next right now.
But if they were to do that, Keith, then how can they keep? No disrespect, right? But how weak does that show the board if they are to continue to be led by the fans? And I understand the fans have got a big say, but we're getting to within the stage of every bad result, they're going to be chasing people off the bus. Where does it stop? They've got to they've got to draw a line, make what they think is the best decision for the football club, and why they put the football experts in place, and go there. They can't just go back and be swayed by the angry mob again.
Listen,
that's not going to
totally take your
forward.
point. I totally take your point, but I think they tried to do that by sticking with Russell Martin for as long as they did, and it was in total defiance of a support that had already turned. Russell Martin could have been out. He lasted 120 days. He was lucky to get to 62 days because he was so far out his depth. It was so obvious, and that's what brought about such an angry response from the supporters. You know, I totally get your point, Bunsey, but what I'm saying is it's a really difficult situation to throw Danny Rohl into at this point, a guy with so little experience, a 36-year-old, and only his second managerial job, and he's already starting on day one with people growling at him, not through anything that he's done or that he's not done, but because of the decision-making and the decision-makers at Ibrox right now. And there's enormous distrust towards Kevin Thirlwell, and I'd say it's justifiable. I think his position is untenable. So you've got a range of support, I think probably the vast majority of whom would agree with that. So they can't trust anything that Kevin Thirlwell does. They can't look at it and say, well, I know he's got no experience, but Kev reckons he's a right good go here, a right good fit. Whereas with Kevin Muscat, at least they can look at a track record there and say, he's been successful everywhere he's been. He's won trophies. And that is the metric, the only metric that these Rangers supporters really plug into right now.
Go on, Bunsey.
You mentioned there just about obviously Rangers holding on, showing a bit more patience to the Rangers board with Russell Martin. I think there was a financial element to that as well. And the fact he's been pushed out the door has cost the club millions. And the timing, when being forced by the fans, I know the fans wanted him out, but in the long run, it's probably cost them fortunes. If they'd maybe waited a wee bit longer, he'd have exited for a lot less.
That's funny you say that, Bunsey, because I know we're not speaking to the same people, but I spoke to somebody earlier on today who suggested that there's every chance that Russell Martin might push for the full whack of his contract paid up. And if that is because of a contractual loophole whereby if you last at least a certain amount of time in the job, it's you know, maybe a quarter of what it might have been. But yes, I've heard similar, and I've heard it's a really substantial number. A really substantial number. Which, again, just points to the complete kind of farce which continues to unfold at Ibrox right now.